Hello, people. All right, let's get into it. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Chapter 1. If you were absent or don't understand it, watch the video, listen. A lot is getting set up here. So first of all, pivot to narrator number 2. Robert Walton was narrator number 1. He wrote all the letters to his sister Margaret. Oh, and by the way, if I ever say, Elizabeth for Margaret, sorry, it's Robert and Margaret, brother, sister. But now that we're starting chapter 1, we have Victor Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein. He is actually starting to tell the story. He's telling the story of his whole childhood in chapter 1. It's really important that you understand that because we have several narrators in this story. So this is like person 2. He goes back to his birth. I am by birth a Genovese, Geneva, Switzerland. He's Swiss, but they lived in Italy. So that's kind of important to know as they're moving around. He's talking about his father first. Okay, so he's not talking about himself. He's talking about his dad, Monsieur or Mr. Frankenstein. So we'll just call him Mr. Frankenstein. That's the dad. His dad worked for the government, kind of a big wig. He was a respected man, high up kind of in power, but because he was so busy and because he was so dedicated to the people of his country, he did not have an opportunity to get married. So it says, it was not until the decline of life that he became a husband and the father of a family. Mary Shelley does not give you an age. You can use your imagination, but go back 200 years, the decline of life, like that could be in your late 30s, that could be your 40s, it could be your 50s. Shoot, if you're in your 50s and 200 years ago, you're probably lucky to be alive. But use your imagination. He's an older man. That's what you need to know. Then the next part, as the circumstances of his marriage, that paragraph, Victor Frankenstein, the one telling the story, is talking about a friend of his father's, a man named Beaufort. He was a successful businessman, successful as was Mr. Frankenstein. But this Beaufort fellow, kind of had some problems with his business, and he basically loses money, and then he's kind of publicly humiliated for something. He has to leave. He feels that it would be in his best interest to leave the country, so he leaves, and he makes it difficult for people to find him. So when Mr. Frankenstein wants to go find his friend, he has a difficult time. It takes him, I believe it says 10 months to find him. He eventually locates him, and by the time Mr. Frankenstein gets there to check on Beaufort, the guy is really pretty sick. So he's sick. He's sick with grief. He's not doing well. And now here, the next character is Carolyn Beaufort. So the friend Beaufort has a daughter. This daughter, Carolyn, is a young woman. Now, no age is mentioned. We don't know how old she is, but we know that she is a young person, and I'm assuming she's like a young teenager or a middle teenager. She's trying to hold this family together, she and her dad. She's trying to take care of him in his grief, in his sickness. So at that end of 3 months, he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. So Beaufort is just kind of going downhill. Carolyn is attending to him, and then there's a little bit of information here, but Carolyn Beaufort possessed a mind of an uncommon mold, and her courage rose to support her in her adversity. That means she has dealt a difficult situation, and she is trying to make the most of it. She procured plain work. She got a job. She got a simple job. She's probably not super educated, because young women weren't necessarily educated so much 200 years ago. But she earned a pittance. That means a very, very tiny amount, scarcely sufficient to support life. She and her dad are barely making it. They hardly have any food. So several months passed in this manner. Her father grew worse. He eventually dies. And that's Beaufort. The Beaufort guy dies, okay? Monsieur Frankenstein, he is the friend to Beaufort, but because Carolyn is now an orphan, Mr. Frankenstein says, okay, I will not let this girl become a beggar. Now, if you go back 200 years and you're looking at a young girl who has no brother and no father, she has no man in her life to take care of her. Well, at that time, women didn't have any rights, any power. You couldn't hold land. You couldn't get an education. You couldn't necessarily get a job that was like a good job. And so she's been taking care of her dad. Mr. Frankenstein says, okay, I love and respect Carolyn because she's my friend's daughter, but almost like she's my own to look after. So he sends her to live with relatives in Geneva. That's the part where it says he conducted her to Geneva and placed her under the protection of a relation. We don't know who. It doesn't matter. It's not pertinent to the story. But what's pertinent is 2 years after this event, Carolyn became his wife. So young Carolyn, who was too young to be left on her own, is now married to Mr. Frankenstein. Okay? However old he is, we don't know. Use your imagination. And how old is she? How young is she? We don't know. Use your imagination. If you watch like Pride and Prejudice, when the youngest daughter runs off, she's like 15. Okay? So anywhere between 15 and 20 something would be an age when someone could become a wife, even though it might not be socially acceptable. Even then at 15, that's pretty young. So after the 2 years, she could be 18. I don't really know. So it does say there was a considerable difference between the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in bonds of devoted affection. Even though you might think it's weird that there is probably 20 or 30 years age difference between them, at this time, Mary Shelley is saying, not really a problem. And remember, Mary Shelley met Percy Shelley when he was 21 and she was 16. So she thinks 16 is a perfectly fine time to meet somebody who's the love of your life. So consider that. Remember, always understand what the author is trying to tell you. So now we have Monsieur Frankenstein, and then Carolyn Beaufort, who are now the Frankensteins. They get together, they have a child, that's Victor. That's where Victor comes in. Victor is our main character. He's the protagonist. He's the guy who is currently telling the story. He's the one who's going to be our main actor in this whole thing. So we got the dad Frankenstein, we've got the mom Frankenstein, Carolyn, and now we have Victor. The story switches a little bit to this kind of idyllic upbringing, idealism. He talks about, oh, I just loved my family. Everything was great. My parents loved each other. She had suffered because she was so poor a little bit, so her health maybe wasn't that great. So they moved to Italy, and they're living around the Lake Como area. That's like northern Italy. And she is just a wonderful mother, but she has wanted to have a daughter. Now, by the time Victor is 5 years old, it says he was an only child for a while, and when he was about 5 years old, they were in Italy. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of Lake Como. Their benevolent disposition often made them enter the cottages of the poor. So Carolyn had always wanted a daughter. That is in here somewhere. Gosh, if I find it, I will read it to you. She had always wanted a daughter, and she only has Victor. So it's like, oh, we love you, Victor, but I really always wanted a girl. And then this is at a time when, if you're married, then you probably are going to have a bunch of children. Maybe she had something wrong with her body. I don't know. It's not part of our story. But she couldn't have a child or didn't have a child, and she wanted a daughter. She goes into this area of the poor. They enter these cottages of the poor. This is where Carolyn meets an Italian family who is, they are quite poor. They have a number of half-clothed children. And the dad, Frankenstein, Mr. Frankenstein, has gone to Milan, Italy. The mother, accompanied by Victor, they go to this poor house, and there's a peasant and his wife, okay, very poor Italian family. They are distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes, so they don't have very much food. And among these, there was one which attracted my mother far above the rest. She appeared of a different stock. If you think about what Italians typically would look like, you'd say, okay, maybe darker hair, maybe olive-toned skin. And so among these, we've got one who's very thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold. She has blue eyes, her blue eyes cloudless. So one kid stands out from the rest. And so the peasant woman, again, you guys have to go back like 200 years. If you're poor, you're always trying to get up out of poverty. And how can you do this if you have a bunch of little kids? Well, the poor family who has this one little girl, they had adopted her. They were caring for her because her mother had died giving birth to her. The father had been some kind of a government somebody, and he's either arrested, in prison, in another country, he could be dead. They don't know, he never came back for her. So the little blonde girl has no family except for this poor family who she had been given to for them to take care of her. Along comes Carolyn Frankenstein, who has always wanted a daughter. And the peasant woman looks at Carolyn as like, oh, you could be the savior of this child. You could take this child off my hands and give her the upbringing that would lift her out of poverty. And so they agree on this. They say, yes, this will be a good arrangement. Carolyn brings her home, and then a couple paragraphs later, when my father returned from Milan, he found playing with me in the hall of our villa, a child fairer than a pictured cherub. And so this little girl is Elizabeth Lavenza, one of the main characters. You're going to want to write that down. Do keep a character map of these people. So now you should have Mr. Frankenstein, the dad, with Carolyn, the mom. They together have Victor, and then they adopt Elizabeth Lavenza. So anyway, what Carolyn now, because she had once been kind of an orphan, because when her dad died, she was literally an orphan, she now has money. Mr. Frankenstein is a wealthy man. Carolyn is therefore wealthy. She lifts this little girl, Elizabeth Lavenza, out of poverty, and she's going to raise her in a more upper class home. So that's how Elizabeth comes into the Frankenstein family. So she is an adopted sister to Victor, but they're not related by blood, okay? So she's just a random girl off the street who will now be raised in the same home. So I hope this is all helpful. We will pick it up on the next one. If I think of anything else important, I'll try to include it on the next video. See you later. See you on the next one.